I'm Mary Sherwood Savinsky. I'm an occupational consultant, and I've been offering a series of discussions, I guess, or presentations on tips for interviewing. And I'm happy you were able to join the session today, and I hope that you'll get a lot out of it. On the presentation that'll be posted on YouTube following this, you'll see a number of links that you can access for various free resources such as job searching, interviewing articles, how to present during a group interview, all kinds of articles and tools and tips and tricks that might help you in your job search, and especially as we're talking about now interviewing, and that's when a lot of job seekers get more nervous than any other time is if they have an interview upcoming or if they are working at obtaining an interview and they might have something that they are trying to overcome, some issue or a particularly hard question or challenge for them. Some of the folks I work with are a little introverted and they need a little bit of confidence boosting. Other folks maybe talk a little too fast or even are just the opposite, a little boastful perhaps. So regardless of what your issue is or your concern about interviewing, I'm sure you'll get a couple of good tips from today's session and from the others in this series. And at the very least from the other resources that make available online for you. They are free for the most part. If there's anything I can do to help you through any of my paid services, of course I'm happy to do that as well. And I do try very hard to keep my prices reasonable so that people that are looking for work can't afford to ask me to help them. I do try to serve as a resource in general though. So if you're not sure if I can help you or not, just reach out and ask, and I'll be happy to try to help you if I can. So today's topic is strike a pose. I'm calling it. In the previous sessions, I'll just review a little bit. We talked about the importance of over-preparing for an interview, really, not just practicing, but over-preparing so that you can feel very confident and comfortable when you get in front of an employer. We talked about taking notes in interview tip number 2 and the importance of being prepared to take notes and to be able to write questions that you can refer to later in the interview or after the interview with thank you notes. So it's very important to be prepared to take notes during an interview. You want to wear the appropriate clothing and make sure it's not only appropriate looking but comfortable, and that you're not going to be pulling and tugging at your clothes during the interview, or that while you can walk very well in them, you can't sit down very comfortably in them. So it's important to test those things out ahead of time. Visiting the location of the interview ahead of time is very important as well. You want to make sure that you're going to be allowing yourself enough time to get there, and if it's in an office building, that the suite or department isn't hard to locate. If you go ahead of time, sometimes you can really figure out exactly how long you are going to need to get to the interview and to the actual office and or department, because sometimes it can be a little tricky and the floors maybe aren't labeled clearly, or the suites aren't labeled clearly. So you want to make sure that you know where you're going. That can also make you feel more confident because you can visualize a little bit where it is you're going to be going, and kind of imagine yourself in that situation ahead of time so that you can feel a little more confident and take away a little bit of the unknown, which can be a little scary a lot of times, especially if you're already nervous. We also spoke about the importance of relaxing and just not practicing for the interview right up till the moment of the interview. You really want to be able to absorb everything, and you should be well prepared and have spent all the time that you needed preparing for the interview. There's no need to stay up late cramming the night before the interview. And those are all the tips about preparing before the interview that I've shared up to this point. Tip number 6, which was to breathe, was really the first tip dealing with that very nerve-wracking period, which is during the interview, in the actual interview itself. So you do want to make sure and breathe. That'll do a couple of things. It'll get oxygen to your brain so you can think. That's important. but more importantly, it'll help you to keep from saying a lot. That's one of the things that I work with people on during practicing for an interview, is avoiding saying It's okay to say it a few times. Everybody does it. You're thinking, you're in the habit of doing that. It's not going to hurt you terribly to say a few times during an interview. But you want to try to avoid it as much as you can. So by breathing in instead of saying that can really help you to avoid filling in the silence with those nonsense syllables. So those are some of the things that we've already talked about in this series of interview tips. Let's go ahead and start talking about striking a pose during this session. And what does that mean? Well, a lot of times people also fill in the silence because they're afraid that the employer is going to think they're spacing out when they're actually trying to think of the answer to the next question. There's no need really to worry about that. The employer expects you to think about the question that they're asking and appreciates the fact that you are giving the question some thought. So there's really no need to be overly concerned about whether or not they're going to think you're spacing out. They will assume that you are thinking about the answer to their question, and they will appreciate that because that's one of the qualities that employers are looking for in people that they hire. So that will really impress them that you're taking the time to think through your answer before you actually spit it out. So that's very important. So feel comfortable. Try to remind yourself that it's okay to take a few minutes or a few seconds to think about the answers to your questions and to be thoughtful. Now, if you're like me, sometimes my mind works faster than most people's ears, and certainly the words that come out sometimes can be a little quick because my mind's working very fast. My mouth tends to try to follow, but not everybody can keep up. So if you are a person that speaks quickly, you want to be mindful of that and just slow yourself down, and by just pausing and thinking about the answers that you're giving, making sure that you're answering the actual question that's asked is very important. So just slow down, do take a deep breath, do think about the answer to the question that you want to give, how you want to give it. And if you feel like you need to buy some time and communicate somehow to the employer that you're thinking and that you haven't spaced out, that'll make you feel more comfortable. One of the things that you can do is to strike a pose. And some people just do this naturally when they're thinking. I know a lot of people will just like put their hand on their chin while they're thinking, let me think about that. They're actually saying with their hands, and you can tell that they're thinking. Other people maybe will tug at their earlobe or, look thoughtful. That's fine if you have some of these poses that you do already when you're thinking. And if you can't think of any poses that you do, ask a friend or two or a loved one, is there any pose that you typically do take on when you're thinking, so that you can be aware of this and actually use it and employ it during an interview, so that you're kind of reminding yourself that you're thinking, but you're also giving a clue to the employer that you are giving his question or her question serious thought, which is what you want to do during any business situation, but especially during an interview where you're trying to impress the employer. So that's something you can do. Some of my clients feel more comfortable actually saying, that's a good question. I'm going to just give that some thought. And usually that's just enough time to give the question some thought. You don't really have to have too much silence beyond that, because it's kind of a filler rather than a nonsensical syllable like or or one of those. You're actually saying, that's a good question, and I'm thinking about that as we're speaking, or whatever feels comfortable to you. But actually think about it and say it if that helps you to feel more comfortable to verbally communicate with the employer that, hey, I'm giving this question some thought because that's a good question, and I'm a thoughtful person. That's going to impress the employer that way. So again, there's really no need to worry overly about the fact that the employer is going to worry about you spacing out if you have a moment or two of silence while you're thinking. But if that's a concern, there are these couple of things that you can do to really reiterate to yourself more than the employer that it's okay to think through your answer and to take that pause and to have that moment of silence while you formulate the answer to the question. And again, I can't stress this enough, and it's a bad habit of mine. It's one of my weaknesses. I'll admit that to you right now. And it's probably a lot of other people's weaknesses. They think they know what the question is before they've really thought through it. So they're already giving an answer sometimes. I know I do this if I'm not careful, to a question that they think the interviewer is asking, when in actuality he or she may be asking a completely different question. So think about the question that's asked and the reason behind it, and then you'll answer the question appropriately. It's worth the extra few seconds to really think about the question so that you do give a good, well thought out, well spoken answer to that question, because it is important. So let's see. We've talked a little bit about how you can underline for yourself and also communicate to the employer that you're giving thought to the question, and we've talked about the fact that you can actually say that it's okay to do that. Again, the person that you're speaking with is going to appreciate that you're taking time to think about the question, so remind yourself of that first and foremost. But if you want to, go ahead and say, I'm giving that question some thought. That's a really good question. Thought about it before, but now that I'm talking with you, this is my answer. And one of the things we've also talked about in the other sessions that kind of plays into this is, if you can make the interview a conversation, that's going to put you at ease, the interviewer at ease, and have things flowing a little bit better so that you will feel a little more comfortable with a period or two of silence. You don't want it to drag out, of course. And if you do need more thought and your mind is just blanking, you can always say, do you mind if I give that some more thought, and we can circle around back to that. Or you can ask that they rephrase the question for you, and that might make it a little clearer to you, and it might be just enough to kind of unfreeze your thought process. Sometimes when we get nervous, we do shut down, and it can be embarrassing. And if you get in a situation like that and you are embarrassed, just say, this is embarrassing, but my mind just blanked. So do you mind repeating the question? It depends on your comfort level, how you've developed a rapport with the interviewer, and what the question actually was, and at what point during the interview. You might just say, do you mind rephrasing that, or can you repeat that for me so I'm sure that I understood the question. Whatever feels comfortable to you, but think about what you're communicating to the employer in the way that you say it, and understand that it is okay to ask that the employer to repeat the question if you need it to be repeated. That shouldn't be an issue. It's just like any other conversation, and try to keep in that mindset as you're approaching the interview, and try to pull the interview in such a way that it becomes a conversation, so that you do feel more comfortable and you get a sense of the cadence and the rhythm and the tone, and can know what to expect going forward during the rest of the interview. So try to make it a conversation if you can. That'll put you at ease, and the interviewer too, because sometimes the interviewers are not comfortable and confident either. So if you can put them at their ease, they're going to remember that, and they're going to feel good about you coming in for this interview. That'll be a strike in your favor, and that's what you're looking for. So far, again, we've practiced interview tip number 1, over preparing, writing notes and being prepared to jot notes and questions. Let's see, dressing in appropriate and comfortable clothing. Visiting the location the day ahead of time to make sure that you're going to be able to find it easily and have enough time. You want to relax. You want to breathe during the interview, and that'll help you to be more engaging and more thoughtful and communicative too. So today, if you do need more time for thought, don't be afraid to just take a few seconds and think about it. If you need to, strike a pose or just say, that's a great question. I'm going to give that some thought. You can always buy extra time, again, by saying, do you mind if you could repeat that question? I really want to make sure that I understood what you're asking me before I answer it. And again, interviewers, employers in general are going to be happy to have you thinking about their questions and your answers. That's an important skill and quality that employers are looking for. So take time to think about it. Now, again, when I post this online, I'll have a number of links at the beginning and the end of the slides included in the presentation that will take you to the articles on my blog, on Career Realism, on the web, examiner.com's another site that I write for, and I have this series of articles relative to these presentations posted there. I have links to that and other Google Hangouts. You can chat with me live. Skype, mary.e.sherwood is my Skype address if you need to reach me that way. You can always email me at lifeworks@mail.com, not Gmail, just mail.com. That's lifeworks@mail.com. I hope you visit my website. If I can help you, please reach out and ask me. Happy to be a resource if I can. I do help people for a living, so I'm happy to charge you for any of the services that I offer that you need. But again, I do like to pride myself in being a resource to people and sharing information with them that I feel like will be beneficial to them. So all that information will be posted online. And since we have a few more minutes today, I did have a few questions that folks asked me about this week. And really they were surrounding, if I had to pick a theme, answering what could be termed negative interview questions, or questions that you might be tempted to answer in the negative. And that can be a real challenge during an interview because you always want to be positive, of course. And you never say anything negative if you can avoid it. But it's hard if an employer is asking you some of these questions that I'll just put out there and talk about with you here today. One is, well, can you tell me about some of your weaknesses? Well, what are you going to tell them? One of my clients asked me recently, am I going to tell him I'm vindictive? I don't think that's going to go over well during the interview. Well, no, it probably wouldn't. And, after working with him, we came up with an answer that was more along the lines of, Mr. Employer, I tend to be a perfectionist, and I just really think that if somebody's going to do something, it should be done right. And I know it drives my coworkers and even my wife a little crazy sometimes, but I just really don't want to stop until I have it done the best possible way that I can do. And I know I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I'm working on toning that down a little bit, because sometimes in today's environment we only have so long to do certain things, but it does frustrate me if I can't do the best possible job. So I do often ask, and I have a little bit more time to make sure that this is just right. I want to go back and double check that. And I think that's good, but I do think that I might drive some of my coworkers a little crazy by insisting that, the job needs to be done right. And I believe that's very important. So, of course, he put that in his own words, but of course, what he was doing was communicating the fact that this weakness, quote unquote, was actually a good quality, being a perfectionist or wanting to get the job done right and correctly, and also communicating that he was aware that there were sometimes time constraints that did come into play, so he's not going to take forever to accomplish a job that should take an hour, let's say. So those are things to think about when you're being asked a negative question like, what is your weakness? And you should always come up with one weakness that just on the side. Everybody has at least one. You probably have more than one. If you can't come up with one, ask a loved one. They'll help you out there. Trust me. If you want to balance things out, ask them about your good qualities as well. But I'm sure someone who knows you well will be able to help you with a weakness if you just are not able to think of one. I think you'll probably be able to come up with one on your own. So good luck with that. Another thing that employers ask that is sometimes a little negative is, can you tell me about the worst boss that you've ever had? And of course, you don't want to say anything negative about your employer, a previous employer, certainly not your current employer. And you want to be very careful how you answer this question. Well, one way you can approach it is to say, well, I can't really say as I've ever had a bad boss per se, but I can think of a time or two when my boss might have done whatever. Maybe they came to you late in the day and they asked you to complete an unreasonable task in the 10 minutes you had before quitting time. So then you can talk about how you overcame that. For example, you might say, well, I can't say as I've ever had a bad boss, but I can think of a boss who was in the habit of sometimes coming to me late in the day and asking me to do large tasks that would take more than the amount of time that I had available to do it well. And I would have to work with him and negotiate and communicate a little bit and say, this task is going to take me longer than I really have left in the workday. Did you want me to stay over or come in early? Or did you want me to just put it off until the next day so that I could get it done well for you and make sure that it's done properly? And that usually was enough to clue him in that it was an unreasonable request in the amount of time that was available. So I learned a lot from that by being able to communicate and negotiate and talk with my boss about that. I really learned that he respected my ability to be able to come to him and say, I need more time. And that's what he needed to hear, because he had his own work that he was doing, and I was just taking care of a small piece of a larger project for him, let's say. So there's a couple of tips for you so that hopefully you can take them and use them to your benefit. My phone is ringing in the background. I apologize. Usually I do turn it off before one of these sessions. I'm just going to go get that. I'm sure it's a client. Take care and have a great day.